Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Common Theologian. My name is Krista Ewart, and this is a place where we have common conversations about God. Today, I am talking to Lucy, and she is with Adam House in Canada, Toronto, Canada. Lucy, can you tell us a little bit about what Adam House is and what you do?
Sure. So my name's Lucy Chimity, and I'm the director of Adam House, which is a refugee home for refugee claimants or asylum seekers, as they're sometimes called. We're a home, so people live here up to 4 months, and we help them with their immigration and settlement while they're staying here. We're also a Christian ministry, so most of our staff who are here are here in sort of the capacity of missionary, and we have a Bible study once a week that people can attend. I've had really good conversations through that, and just many good years of being with refugees as they start their journey here in Canada.
I love hearing about what you do because Lucy and I first met when we were in Bible college. And my first memory of Lucy is basically her and my brother had devised a plot to get her brother and myself hooked up, basically. So there was a little matchmaking going on. Now that didn't work for multiple reasons, but I say the biggest reason is because actually her brother is just a male version of me, and I've married somebody who's complete opposite of me. I always think about how disastrous it would be to marry somebody exactly like me. But I love hearing where people have where people have journeyed from, what they've ended up doing with the education that they got. And would you say that Adam House then is like the first port of call when people arrive in Canada?
Yes, essentially. We do get referrals through other places that they might sort of connect with first. The primary one being a program of the Red Cross, the Canadian Red Cross, which is called First Contact. And they have business cards at ports of entry. And so they're often the first call, but then they make referrals to refugee homes and shelters. And we get referrals through former residents and other shelters in the city. So, but this is sort of the first home for most people where they put down sort of semi-permanent roots and get the help that they need.
So, in a country like Canada, how would you say that people are, where are those ports of entry? How are people coming in? Because here in the UK, obviously, it's going to be a lot different. It's an island. So, in Canada, it's so huge. Where do people come from?
In Toronto, we would see people that come across the border from the US in Fort Erie or Windsor, perhaps Niagara Falls. Also, people coming across in Quebec may make a secondary migration to Ontario. But also, we get a lot through our international airport. So, someone might come here on a tourist visa or study visa or something like that, and then they make a refugee claim. So different ways. I think primarily the airport at the moment,
Okay.
or prior to COVID-19, I should say. The
Yeah,
the the
exactly.
flow of refugees has definitely decreased since March
Mm.
for probably obvious reasons. So,
Yeah, which actually doesn't apply here in the UK,
yeah.
which we'll get to. But I just want to talk a little bit about today, looking at the Globe and Mail and how they have decided that the agreement between Canada and US for asylum seekers, the safe country, you're going to have to clarify that for you, but the safe country
Yep.
agreement is unconstitutional. What kind of implications is that going to have?
So the third safe country agreement, I'd have to check the dates, but probably it came into being around 2003 or four. And prior to that, refugees or asylum seekers were free to move from one safe country to another to make their asylum claim. So it was between Canada and the US, but any safe countries like European countries are included in that. And the idea is that the first country you arrive in that is safe, that's where you should make an asylum claim. And so that's been in effect for close to 2 decades now. But in the years since the election in the US, and Trump came in and had some interesting policies in regard to people in the US from other places, and was rescinding agreements or threatening to rescind agreements. And so a lot of people started coming to the US at that point. Not through an actual border crossing, but at unmanned points. And so uh, in Canada, if you get into Canada, you can make a refugee claim. If you make it past the border, then you can make your claim. And so that was something that was happening with increasing frequency from 2017. Um, and then um, I think people people started feeling like the third safe country agreement shouldn't apply anymore if it was forcing people to choose, because they can be more dangerous routes to start with, but also that people who want to seek asylum aren't actually safe in the US because of detentions, and now with COVID, people being detained in conditions where COVID can run rampant in those detention centers. So yeah, essentially we challenge the courts that the third safe country agreement should not apply to the US because it's not a safe country for refugees.
I find that so sad. And I remember seeing news articles where people were trying to cross the border in the dead of winter in the prairies, which for anybody
Yeah.
who's not from Canada, it's like minus 40 and people can freeze to death. So these people who are coming across the border, arriving in Canada, either through the airport or at illegal border crossings, what are the state of these people, these refugees? How are they doing mentally? What's their financial situation? What are you seeing?
First of all, just we don't call them illegal border crossings. We call them irregular border crossings because we like to avoid legality around that because it is legal to enter a country to make a refugee claim,
Oh,
no matter if that's regular or not. So just that
yeah, it's good to
to
know.
start with. Yeah, and I think that applies to the UK as well, right? Like it's actually legal to enter the UK to make a refugee claim, no matter how you do that. Um, so, um, so for a refugee claimant who comes in, I think for the most part, we see people in pretty good condition, especially if they've arrived directly on an international flight, because they're yeah, they're just able to come here directly from their country of origin, and certainly they may have some trauma related to what has happened to them there, but the journey has been fairly straightforward. for people crossing the border, it can be a little bit different depending on how they came to the US. Some people have had a very long journey that has included walking through parts of South and Central America. Some travel by ships as well. But others who come up from the US have actually lived there for a while, whether it's a few months or a few years. And so they're doing okay as well. Things, they're not a bunch of ragtag individuals. But certainly lots of trauma related to what's happened in their country of origin. And even if they've been in the US, you're ripping up your family from what you may have already established there. And you're starting new. So there's a trauma to that as well, to starting over. But once they arrive in Canada, they're not authorized to work yet. They have to apply for work permits. Certainly there's a period of time where they're quite reliant on social services and organizations to help them just even meet their daily needs. So
You bring up a really good point around the language that we use with refugees and asylum seekers. And I didn't realize that in Canada you can cross anywhere if you're seeking asylum or seeking safety. But we found that in the UK, this has become a big issue because our prime minister made a comment the other day saying that these people have come to our country illegally. And I can see how this really builds up this negative perception of refugees. Um, there's a lot of people who feel negatively about them because they feel like they're doing something illegal, and then on top of which they feel like they are taking from the resources of taxpayers because I believe that in the UK, if somebody comes as an asylum seeker, then they can receive health care from the government. I don't know if the same is
yeah.
applicable in Canada, but how do we sort of change the language around this situation?
I think just by calling it out, in 2017, when there was an increase of irregular arrivals in Canada, there was that rhetoric around it being illegal. And that was in use by politicians and in the media, and by Canadians. And we just really had to challenge that and call it out whenever it was used, and correct people's perception, because we can say it's illegal. It's easy to use that word, but under the Geneva Convention, we have we must provide asylum for those who seek it if they arrive on our shores, and there's nothing illegal in that act. So it's just really important to call it out and say, hey, it's not illegal. They're not coming here to do anything but make a refugee claim. They're not here
Right.
to cause trouble or whatever. Um, and in terms of drains on resources, um, refugee claimants and asylum seekers eventually become permanent residents and citizens, and they work and they contribute to the economy. Um, there are some statistics on how much someone would contribute once they're working for their entire lifetime, and they pay back many fold what they have received in compensation in terms of health or social assistance of any kind. So it's it's an unconventional way of immigrating, but they still become contributors in our society for the most part.
That's such a
And I mean, even if there is a drain, these are people that need our help. And so if it does drain a bit of money, who cares? It's an act of humanity to welcome people and help help them have a more normal life. You may be saving lives. You're probably saving lives by accepting asylum seekers, right? So
Absolutely. And we see that in the UK, and it's something, I mean, what you've said about them contributing back to society is so important to keep in mind, especially as we see what's happening here in that we're seeing a huge increase in the amount of people who are trying to cross the channel and get into the UK. And actually, very, very recently, a body was washed up on shore of a child, a teenager who was trying to cross the channel and drown because they're stuck in these very small, flimsy dinghies and trying to get across. And it blows my mind that we can be we can have such negative feelings as a nation towards these people who are just seeking safety. um, and I was wondering what your thoughts on are on, um, as a country, I mean, that is the misconception, is that they're going to be a drain on our resources, and that's why we're so resistant. And in the UK, we're sort of like, go back to France or go back to Greece, or we are resistant to welcoming them here. So as a nation, how do you think that we can respond? um, why do you think that nations are not understanding what's paid back to them and what they do contribute to our societies?
Well, I think that once someone sort of has a negative stereotype or a negative idea in mind, it's hard to change that perception. So the there were a few organizations here in Canada that um, they feel like there is a huge middle in any population that could swing either way. So you might have people who are anti refugee, and you have people who are pro refugee, and then you have a whole bunch of people in the middle who aren't sure where they sit. And so the idea was not even to even though I like to say that refugees give back, the idea was more to tell stories about refugees and get people to understand refugee situations. And I would go a step further and say that I think it's really important for people to know refugees. To have friendships with refugees. And then you see that they're just people like you and me. They want their kids to grow up and have opportunities for education and to be safe, and not to grow up in refugee camps. Um, so I think that's really important. And maybe that can be a hard thing to do, to seek out refugees depending on where you are. But I think that's really important, to hear the stories and to try to get to know someone who's in that situation. People might even know people who came as refugees, but they don't know that. They might
Yeah,
just see them as maybe they're an immigrant or something, right? But,
yeah.
yeah.
Would you say that's probably the biggest thing that we can do, especially in terms of what our response is as Christians? Um, would you say that building those friendships and listening to stories are probably one of the most important things that we can do?
Absolutely. Um, I think when we talk about welcoming the stranger or the sojourner, there's several ways that we can help out in terms of maybe support financially, but it's also just that friendship piece of making someone feel welcome and part of the fabric of our society. I think, you know, you can just, if you just plunk refugees somewhere and take care of them, but you never interact with them, they don't feel that sense of welcome either. And you don't know them and their situations. So coming together and finding common ground is essential. It makes people advocates. It makes everyday people advocates. If you know someone who's a refugee, if you know their story, if you know what their life in the UK or Canada is now like, when you hear negativity around refugees, you can speak out.
Yeah.
and say, hey, you don't have the full picture here. I know refugees, and this is what refugees are like. So I think it's an important piece.
I can't imagine that it's easy. I mean, even living in a different country than the one that I grew up in, I always feel a little bit out of place. And yet I'm still English speaking and can somewhat navigate the culture. And so I can't even imagine what it's like to go to a place where maybe you don't speak the language or you're completely unfamiliar with what's culturally acceptable or whatnot. But it plays into this idea that I've tried to keep in mind, adopt my whole life of extreme hospitality and just how as Christians we're called to extreme hospitality. And I sort of feel like as Christians, individual Christians and as countries, that's what we need to be doing for these people. Um, and I was just kind of looking in terms of what the Bible says about um, what our response should be, and was really drawn to this passage in Leviticus where it's Leviticus chapter 19, verse 33. When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And sometimes we don't even take it as far as that. We don't think about even thinking of them as natives in our land,
Yeah,
which just takes it that step further.
yeah, absolutely. No, I really love that one too. And the idea of treating them as native born. I think that's so differences between uh, people who have come to our countries in different ways. That creates division, and it's not healthy. Yeah,
Well, and
for
they can
for community.
absolutely, and they can teach us so much too about. I've talked in a couple of the other episodes about this collective image of God and how each person contributes to that image. It's not us individual. It's not me, Krista, alone being the image of God. Actually, you will never fully understand God if all you know is what I can reflect of him, because
Yeah.
it's just a fraction of what who he is. Um, Thank you so much for chatting, Lucy. And I just really appreciate the heart that you have for refugees. And it almost feels, I feel a little bit like called out, and that I'm not doing enough, or there's more that we can be doing. Um, and so I guess I
Well,
just
it's a hard world, Krista. There's a lot of issues, and we can't meet them all, right? But
um,
you never know. You might inspire someone to carve out a new niche
I
with
hope
refugees.
so. I hope so.
So,
There are a lot of organizations. I have looked in the UK. So if you're in the UK, um, all you need to do, this is all I literally did, was search refugee organizations. And there's tons of them who you can volunteer with or donate to. And in Canada, I'm sure that there's the same. There's refugee houses as well as the organizations who help them. Just as we close, Lucy, is there one resource that if people are like, I really want to learn more about this situation, or I want to learn more about the experience of refugees, but I'm not quite ready to find somebody and get to hear their story, or I don't know how to go about it. Is there somewhere you could point them?
oh, good question. I'm not sure there is any one thing. Oh, you've stumped me now, Krista.
Well, if you think of it, you can always email me, or
Yeah,
and I
for
can
sure.
include it in the comments.
I the other thing that I was thinking, just to add on, was from the scriptures is that generally when God gives commands regarding sojourners, He puts them with orphans and widows quite
Yeah.
often, and really expresses a deep love for that group of vulnerable people, widows, orphans, and sojourners. And so I think we can really take that these are the most vulnerable in our society, and we really need to love and to act justly where they're concerned. So
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed that too, that they'll say foreigners, widows, and orphans in many of the scriptures. And also something to remember is that Jesus himself was a foreigner, and he references how not everybody took him
mhm.
in, even though he was a foreigner. Thank you so much, Lucy. Really good to chat to you, and just thank you for your insight
No
in all this.
problem. Glad to do it.
I've been speaking with Lucy Chimity. She is the executive director of a refugee house for asylum seekers in Toronto, Canada. To find out more about her work, you can visit adamhouse.org. And to check out more episodes of The Common Theologian, please visit thecommontheologian.com.